Good evening. Tonight I'm going to be reading from The Mystery of the Coniunctio, Alchemical Image of Individuation, and I will be reading from the second section of this book. And in this second section, we're going to cover the 10 pictures from the Rosarium Philosophorum from 1550. This is an alchemical text, and so this will be about a 4-part reading. Tonight I'm just going to do an overview of the 10 images that describe a basic cycle that one lives through from an alchemical point of view. This is a basic understanding of an alchemist's mind. So, so there are 10 pictures that are involved in this, and I will present them one by one here. Today we're going to talk about a series of 10 pictures from the alchemical text Rosarium Philosophorum. Jung thought so much of this series that he built one of his major works, The Psychology of the Transference, around it. As he tells us in the introduction to Mysterium Coniunctionis, the psychology of the transference is part of the same enterprise as Mysterium, but in order not to overburden that work, that big work, he decided to put it out separately. My initial reaction to this material was, my God, why did Jung choose something as obscure as the Rosarium Philosophorum to talk about the transference? But through the years, as I've worked with this material and reflected on it, it has dawned on me that more and more that these pictures are magical. It's also clear that they derive from an original experience. Whoever was responsible for these pictures, and that person is lost in the anonymous mists of alchemy, had had the experience and was speaking out of it. The Rosarium pictures are well worth the effort and attention one must pour into them in order to bring them into relation to the modern mind. My hope is that for many of you, they will take on a meaning that will help you relate to the deeper psychological experiences you have had and shall have, and that they will be a permanent addition to your consciousness. To start with, let's go over all 10 of them very quickly. I've labeled each picture with a term of my own to help fix it in consciousness. I'll give you an overview of those now. And then we'll go on to examine each picture in detail. Okay, so these are the 10 pictures. The first one is the mandala fountain representing the prima materia. That's the most basic element in the psyche. Number 2 is the emergence of the opposites. Number 3 is stripped for action. No further comment. Number 4 is descent into the bath. Number 5 is union, the manifestation of the mystery. Number 6 is in the tomb. Number 7 is separation of soul and body. Number 8 is Gideon's dew drips from the cloud. Number 9 is reunion of soul and body. And number 10 is resurrection of the united eternal body. Now, although I've presented these in a linear fashion, I think it is better to think of them as arranged in a circle, representing a circle as shown in diagram 1. Let me give you a bigger version of diagram 1. When arranged that way, you can think of them as a sequence of psychological events that can repeat itself over and over, rather than as a single isolated occurrence. Another advantage to this arrangement is that one can perceive the parallels this series has with other cycles. Another advantage of this arrangement is that one can perceive the parallels this series has with other cycles. Some of you will remember the seminars on the Christian archetype in past years. There I arranged the various nodal points in the life of Christ in the form of a cycle shown in diagram 2. If you compare this with the Rosarium cycle, you can see the similarities once you've grasped, not gasped, grasped. If you compare this with the Rosarium cycle, you can see the similarities once you've grasped their underlying psychological references. Let me spell out the parallels I see between the circle of the Christian archetype and the cycle of the Rosarium Pictures. Okay, let me get the right picture up here. Okay, so picture 2, emergence of the opposites, is analogous to the Annunciation. Picture 3, stripped for action, is analogous to the Nativity. Picture 4, descent into the bath, is analogous to Christ's baptism. Picture 5, union, is analogous to the crucifixion. Picture 6 to 8 in the tomb, separation of soul and body, and Gideon's dew correspond to the crucifixion, lamentation, and entombment of Christ. So this is the crucifixion. This is the lamentation. And this is the entombment of Christ. Pictures 9 and 10, reunion of soul and body, and the resurrection of the united eternal body, correspond to the resurrection and ascension. So this would be the resurrection. And this would be the resurrection of the united eternal body, the ascension. There's another analogous cycle. Gilbert Murray, the great classical scholar, has given us a very valuable description of the cyclic religious drama underlying classic Greek tragedy. He sees the basic cycle, the original of tragic drama, is a ritual reenactment of the death and rebirth of the year spirit. This ritual enactment had 4 chief features, or phases. Now, I think I failed to get that up here, so let me just get it quickly. I think I can get it quickly. Yep. Well, I made a mistake and I don't have that available to me right now. So I will simply describe it to you. It's a circle. Diagram number 3 is a circle. At the top of the circle is number 1, divine hero. At the 3 o'clock position is number 2, Aegon. At the 6 o'clock position is number 3, Pathos. At the 9 o'clock position is Threnos. And at the 12 o'clock position again, above the divine hero, is Theophany, which would be rising to heaven. And so this ritual reenactment had 4 chief features or phases. 1, the protagonist hero, who is Dionysus, the personification of the year spirit, meets an antagonist. He meets an embodiment of evil, and the opposites are constellated. A contest called the agon in Greek ensues between the protagonist and the antagonist. That's the first phase. 2, it leads to a passion or suffering and defeat of Dionysus, the year spirit. That's the pathos, and that's at the 6 o'clock position. Number 3, this is then followed by a lamentation, the threnos, on the part of the chorus, the observers of the drama. Number 4, then a miraculous enantiodromia takes place, and the god remanifests. He resurrects, reappears on another level, and that's called the theophany. Again, I've put the sequence in circle diagram 3 in order to compare it with the others. I think you'll see as we go along that it closely parallels the Rosarium Pictures. I think these parallels are inevitable because these cycles all derive from the same basic archetype. And I would just add that they also parallel the Job archetype, which we've talked about many times, which is contest, defeat, lamentation, and rebirth. The pattern of the Rosarium Pictures represents symbolically the stages of a dynamic process in the objective psyche. I must remind you that the pictures we're looking at today are alchemical pictures, and they are meant to illustrate events going on in the alchemical flask. You might forget that because they're not shown enclosed in the flask, but that's what they're meant to represent. They express events taking place within a vessel, within a containing entity, that is, you and me. Okay, in my attempt to understand these matters psychologically, I'm going to follow a course somewhat different from Jung's. There's no point in my just repeating what he has to say, but I urge you to read that for yourself. I'm going to suggest various other ways to look at the pictures. It's not a matter of either or, but of examining various facets. As with all major symbolic images, they shimmer with a multitude of meaning, and you can probably think of some more yourself if you're so inclined. For my purposes, I'm going to consider this series of pictures as representing three different psychological contexts. The first one, a process going on within the individual psyche. In that case, the vessel containing the process would be a single individual. Two, a second way of seeing it psychologically is as a process going on between two people. In that case, the containing vessel would be the relationship. It would reside within the pair. Three, a third way of seeing it is that it represents a psychological process going on within a group or a community. In that case, it's a collective process, not personal at all. The individuals who make up the group will just be the atoms, so to speak, of the larger collective drama. The more familiar one becomes with alchemical symbolism, the more evident it is that the alchemical images apply to everything. They're operative everywhere. They're operative everywhere. So if one is going to use the imagery for understanding a certain experience or phenomenon, one does need to define the vessel that a given alchemical process is taking place in. And the three most common vessels are the ones I've mentioned here: the individual psyche, a relationship between two people, or a process going on in a larger group. Now let's examine the Rosarium pictures one by one. Okay, so I am called to dinner, so I'm going to stop at that point. But tomorrow, when I do part 2 for this video, I will start going through each of the 10 Rosarium pictures one by one. And also tomorrow we will be continuing on with psychology and alchemy at the regular Monday evening session. So, and Fatima Nahar says that's a recurring image in Eastern imagery as well, 2 heads and 1 body. I agree. My favorite young artist, I'll have to get back so you can see it, but here's her painting. And she's a Palestinian. So anyway, so it is quite indeed quite a common image in the world. And thank you for pointing that out, Fatima. I really appreciate that. And so I apologize that I have to leave, but I promised to end this by 6 o'clock, and I'm a little late because it took me so long to get the images themselves ready to include in the video. So I will be back tomorrow with more. Thank you for joining me today. And thank you for coming, Art. Nice to see you today.